Welcome to episode 3 of Walk the Walk. Today, I'm excited to share our first podcast interview with Homa Tavangar, co-founder of the Big Questions Institute. Homa leads transformative learning for educators and organizations, helping them navigate the future with fearless inquiry. A UCLA and Princeton grad, she brings over 30 years of experience in innovation and education reform, and she's the best-selling author of Growing Up Global. Having lived on 4 continents and speaking 4 languages, Homa offers a unique global perspective during these uncertain times. In our conversation, we'll explore the significant challenges we're facing today and the essential skills we all need to thrive. Homa will also share insights on how parents and educators can guide and support young people by asking big questions, emphasizing resilience and adaptability. Welcome to Walk the Walk, where we go beyond talking the talk. I'm Scott McLarty, head of Providence High School in Burbank, California, and in this show, we talk out of school about growing up and being a grown-up, about learning and leading for a better world. Let's get into it. Homa Tavangar, welcome to Walk the Walk, and especially because you're my first guest.
Thank you. I'm so honored and happy to be here.
Well, the feeling is mutual. I always like to start with, what was your high school experience like?
My high school, actually, I live in the East Coast now, but I went to high school in Southern California, and I was lucky in high school to have a couple of great teachers and some adults that I knew cared about me, and I think that made a huge difference. One other thing that impacted my life very much in high school, it was shortly after the revolution in Iran. Mm-hmm. My family is Persian, Iranian, and we were very negatively impacted. We are exiles, and, it's very dangerous to go back to Iran for my family. And so I was very conscious of what was happening there. And at the same time, being Iranian in like 1980, early 80s, you were persona non grata if you talked about being Iranian. So we were all Persian and tried not to talk about it. So that was also like looming in the background as a very real kind of challenge in terms of identity, belonging, lots of things like that. So it was, this balance between fitting in and trying to become myself.
Yeah. In some ways, a universal adolescent experience, and then highly specific at the same time to your family's and cultural history and the move to the U.S. and all of that.
Yeah.
So you said you had a few great teachers and some adults in your life that you could trust or go to. Mm-hmm. Was there something about them, like, is there a Venn diagram and the greatness in the middle was characterized by the same way, or did they each bring something uniquely great to your high school experience?
I had a couple, these 2 specific teachers. I see them and think of them, Mr. McCowan and Mrs. Hahn. I remember their names. They really believed in students, and I felt like they believed in me. I had never written anything of consequence, and they believed that I could. And now I do a lot of, I know the research behind it. I know a lot of the experience behind that is when students rise to their potential.
Yeah.
And you knew when you were going into that history class and that English class that it wasn't a set of predetermined answers. We were exploring big questions together.
Which is a great segue into your work today with the Big Questions Institute. So tell us a little bit about what you do now and how that, I assume there are some direct connections even to your high school experience.
Well, it's interesting. There is when we talk about it in this way, exploring big questions. My career did not start in education. I've had, as many people now do, like lived multiple lives and this is maybe like my 5th career. I studied economics at UCLA, international economics. And as many people, once you've lived a few more decades than the students today, you realize that every step along the way this is why I'm here. This has all gotten me to this point. So my interest in education actually really came out of my own, less my education than what I saw my children were doing. So I was watching some of their experience in school. I have 3 daughters, and at the time I was doing a lot of work with companies that were understanding global markets. I would work with executives who were terrified of different countries, different markets, messing up culturally. So I started to just explore what are resources out there for parents that can help their own kids, because what I was seeing my own children learning was very concerning. It was like a lot of stereotyping, very limited, that danger of a single story. So I started to wonder what's out there and how can I get involved, or what can I learn as a parent? And when I didn't find quite the resources I was looking for, I essentially wrote the book that I wanted to buy. And that created like a big turning point in my career. So that's long before the Big Questions Institute started. I wrote a book called Growing Up Global, Raising Children to Be at Home in the World. And it was sort of like a manual for parents to raise children to be citizens of the world. And the context was sort of a post 9/11 world. That's when I started thinking about that. And that then set me on a course very quickly to realize these questions, not only for parents, but they need to be really explored in schools. And so I started working more in areas of cultural competence, global citizenship, questions of inclusion, identity, belonging. And then with another colleague, Will Richardson was working on like kind of questions of technology, change in schools, ed tech. And we said, well, together, these are some big questions. And then the Big Questions Institute started as a workshop in 2019. And then in 2020, it kind of blew up. So in some ways, the Big Questions Institute is a little bit of a COVID project. It grew out of that and the need to kind of read the reality of the world and help schools do sense making, not be afraid of big questions. So we have this idea of fearless inquiry and try to put this together for an education, we like to say, that's more relevant, more just, more healthy, more joyful. And it all starts with questions. So in a way, this is a culmination of and many other experiences along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love big questions, ultimate questions. Yeah. And I love the idea you just said a moment ago of reading the reality of the world.
Yeah.
It seems to me that when you combine looking at the world as it truly is, not just how we would want it to be.
Right.
And asking big questions is so relevant today. One of the things that I know you've been doing among many things in recent years and how you and I met is you've been speaking to heads of school across the country. We met 2 years ago when you spoke. You spent half of the day with us 2 years ago and a full day a year ago working with heads across the country. And one of the themes of both of those days was that we are in liminal times, in between times.
Yes.
The late Pope Francis used to say, we are not in an era of change, we're in a change of era.
Oh.
And that seems to get at this idea of liminal times. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by liminal times and how the times we're in now are liminal or express liminality?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So, we hear from lots of people that are like, make it make sense. Nothing makes sense right now. And so for me, this lens of seeing that Yuval Noah Harari talks about, we're in a time between stories. So when the old stories no longer make sense, but we're not really sure what the new story is. So we're in that messy middle. And I'm going to talk with faculty today. And when I spoke, when we worked together during the Head Summit, I shared, like, for me, a very powerful metaphor for nature. And I always want to look to metaphors from nature. I think nature can be a powerful guide.
This metaphor has stuck with me over
And
the
you
years.
know what I'm going to say.
Absolutely.
So the metaphor of the caterpillar transforming into the butterfly. Every culture talks about this story of transformation. It's victory at the end. It's beauty. It's freedom and flight. But rarely spend time what's in the middle. And that cocoon stage, or the pupa, which I always say, like, it sounds like what it feels like. That middle, it lasts longer than either the caterpillar or the butterfly life, is what's in the middle. It's uncomfortable. It's not pretty. It's unrecognizable when it's going through that metamorphosis. If you just zoomed in at that moment that it's in that larval, messiest stage, you couldn't say this was a caterpillar or this is going to be a butterfly. It's something else entirely. And you don't know when it's going to end, but we know that that caterpillar carries memory into the middle stage, and that middle is that liminal, that in between. And so I find that helping to, like, sense make for people right now, the discomfort, the anxiety, the unsettled feeling. And we know that our young people are definitely feeling this with climate anxiety, and just the future is so much less settled than it was for their parents and their grandparents. So this liminal time helps explain a little bit of this VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and other frames that we can talk about. But it kind of explains, okay, we're between stories. And the reality, many people will push back and they'll be like, well, it's always been between stories. When was it not? During the civil rights era, we were between stories. During many, many times. And it's like, okay, that's true. And I know that right now, the institutions that we used to depend on and trust, many people don't feel like they can anymore. So that is part of asking big questions and having that fearless inquiry, is a radical acceptance of, it's not that I like what's happening, but I'm going to be here for it. I'm going to be present for it. I'm going to be in relationship. I'm going to be finding these glimmers of agency, hope, and we're going to get through it together. And I don't know what it's going to look like on the other side, but let's work in a positive way toward it. So yeah, this and a lot of things, I think once you have that frame of liminality, it helps explain, like, where we're at in many, like we talk about the film industry, technology, school, healthcare, law enforcement, university, the benefit of going to university, like, all of those are kind of in liminal stories right now.
Yeah, the old stories are dying, the old structures, systems, and we have no idea what's coming next. And that can be really scary. It can actually feel terrifying at times. So what advice do you give to parents, to educators, and to young people about living in these liminal times?
So I think taking a stance of curiosity and not certainty, that's where big questions also come in. And that wondering, like, we're going to get through it together, wondering. It's very humbling to take that stance. Like, I'm not coming in with the authority and all the answers. But, we were talking earlier, it can be exciting as well. I
Yeah.
think it's much more creative. It calls for a lot more adaptation, adaptability, resilience. And that's like that's what it means to be human in a lot of ways. There may be discomfort, there may be suffering, but like, who said that wasn't going to be part of the package?
Exactly.
And actually, like, that's one of the things like I appreciate about being here at Providence High School. I find this to also be like a spiritual stance of, that curiosity, service, humility, presence, acceptance. These are spiritual qualities and stances as well. And so whatever one's, faith background, or these are some really universal values that I think can help us get through what liminality is. And it's not even like I'm getting through it to get it over with. Radical acceptance means you're not doing it because it's going to be, I'm going to give it till next week. I'm going to give it till next year. That is not very helpful. It ends up resulting in disappointment. So I think that the advice for parents is we're working through it together. There's so much we don't know. How can we be creative to respond to the challenges of the moment? And I find that with every, the challenges of AI, the challenges of geopolitical uncertainty, the challenges of the future of the workforce, on and on and on, that is a conversation about how one would take a creative stance of adaptability. And, there's this quote that's been around for a really long time that we're preparing our students for jobs that don't exist using technologies that haven't been invented to solve problems we've never heard of. So then as an educator or a parent, well, what do? Do you just throw up your arms helplessly? Okay, there's nothing we can do. Or do you say, what is the opportunity in that? Where do I find joy? What is something that I love or I love to do? And how will I be able to adapt to that? So I do think there's a very special role for families in this process to sense make together and to have experiences together. And, it could be in just deepening friendships. And, we talked about hospitality earlier. It could be in almost like ancient gathering and community building. And, maybe it takes us back to those kind of relational experiences that we've kind of let go of.
You're really speaking my language now. For the last year or so, I have been saying to everyone who will listen, I have this conviction that with the rise of artificial intelligence, as artificial intelligence takes over larger and larger swaths of human work and human life, I really believe that the value of the truly human is going to go up. It's going to skyrocket. And so what I heard you saying in advice is things like solidarity, curiosity, creativity, agency, in the sense of it can feel like this is all happening to us.
Right.
But really we have more agency than we think.
Yes.
And that we need to claim it.
It's almost like instead of happening to us, how does it happen with us?
Yes. Or through us.
Yes.
Through both as individuals and communities. And this notion of ancient human practice, the things that human beings used to learn around the campfire, around the hearth in the home, are going to be so important. So when you see or visit schools or talk to educators who are creating communities that are responding to this liminal time what sorts of things do you see them doing?
I see them being much more conversational. So people are having important and meaningful conversations about things that matter. And like when I talked about Mr. McCowan and Mrs. Hahn, my great high school teachers, they would sit down and have conversations with us.
Yeah.
And, that is an ancient campfire kind of what would people do? They would tell stories. So better storytelling. And those are also the leadership lessons. So good leaders are good caretakers of the story. And then everyone around them is a part of that story and learning to tell that story. So schools that are responding well, there are definitely some patterns. And I kind of see it at this point as like breadcrumbs, like we're following, like, what are the breadcrumbs? So I think the agentic, like, what does agency mean? And getting really drilling into that and not just a superficial. So like some schools will say, oh, well, we do project-based learning. But the project has already been determined by the teacher. And it's like, here's your project. Go fill in this shoebox or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
That's not project-based learning. It's thinking about what, having students even to cognitively get their head around, their brain around, what are problems that I care about? So then you have to do research on what's out there and why, and be able to articulate that. So working on problems that matter. And when you're, 6 years old, it might be about puppies or, and then when you're 16, it might be something, completely different it could still be about, puppies, but it could be something, like your ability to solve complex problems grows in complexity. And I always say to parents, like, instead of talking to your kids about what do you want to be when you grow up, talk about what problem do you want to solve?
I love
or
that.
What do you care about? Let's just talk about what we care about instead of like a fixed, I want to be a doctor. And then you can't make any mistakes along the way. You can't experiment. I think helping our kids think about what they care about really can make a very big difference. And it helps us, like what I see with parents around the world that I meet, and I am very fortunate to get to go to many, many countries and work with many different kinds of schools, is that parents are struggling. It's hard right now to be between, your child's attention universally is on the phone. And there are so many things out there that you're worried about for your kids to get to find like what are questions that can engage and have that reciprocal engagement is like golden.
About a year ago, I heard Dr. Vivian Ming, who's a professor at UC Berkeley, and she's been working for many years on AI, even in its earlier stages. And she was talking to a whole bunch of heads and board members in California. And she said the problem, and she's a product of an independent school in California herself. And she said the school has been set up to give students the opportunity to answer well-formed questions. And well-formed questions are, there is an answer. The teacher already knows it. And all the resources you need to find that answer have been laid out in front of you in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And in the age of AI, and I would add in this liminal time in particular, her argument is schools need to start presenting kids with ill-formed questions where you're not even sure at the beginning what the question is. And you're not even presented with an explicit problem, but with the opportunity to find a problem that resonates with you. And that seems to me also to bring in something that we talked a little bit about earlier is flexibility. Flexibility, the ability to pivot, to change course, to change your mind.
Yes.
And direction and attention seems to be a key or a core skill that is going to be probably highly correlated with success and survival in the years ahead.
Absolutely. So there are a couple of, I completely agree. And I think there are a couple of really important concepts that that are kind of rising to the top from what you said. One is about what is a core skill? What are the skills? And what is success? So we have this free download book on the Big Questions Institute website of the 12 big questions schools must answer to imagine irresistible futures. And the first version of that was the 9 big questions schools must answer so they don't go back to normal because normal wasn't that great to begin with.
Yep.
So that normal framing was, we wrote that at the height of COVID. And it was like, let's not go back to normal. This is our chance in this moment of time that,
Absolutely.
liminal time. Let's try to move in the direction that we need to move, but everybody wanted to go back. So in the questions, so we have these big questions, and one of the new big questions in the 12 is, what is success? And so this new definition and the fluid definition of success, that it isn't, I think a liminal story is that you go to school, you get good grades, which means you figured out how to answer the well-formed questions.
Yes. You can play the game of school
You
well.
play that game. Those and I was rewarded for that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So if you play that game well, you will have success. You will go to a good university. You'll get a good job. You'll have a good income. It's a straight line. That has kind of broken. And so the kids who figure it out sooner tend to not only be more successful, but they often have their well-being more intact. And that's a huge concern that was not really on the radar of schools like 10 years ago or even post-COVID. I think that idea of well-being linked to success became very tangible.
Absolutely. Something we talk a lot about around here is that when you graduate from Providence High School, you should have a valuable diploma in one hand and your well-being in the other. And that is it's a false choice to think that you have to choose one or the other. It's not either or. It's both and. And that seems to me that not balance, but maybe creative tension between sort of worldly or intellectual or classical school success and this more holistic approach to success that allows for human flourishing over time. An integration of those things moving forward is so important.
Yeah. So that it's like one of the remnants of the old story is that so much is a binary. It's us versus them, either or, this well-being or happiness or hard work, success. And I think we're learning from young people, they're like, no, we're not making that choice. It has to be yes and. So I think that's interesting. Another binary that came up a minute ago in what you mentioned about the core skills was, a lot of people will say, okay, so now with this age of AI and all this, we need more soft skills. And one of my pet peeves, and I'm going to talk with the faculty about this, is when we call them soft skills, we're relegating them to being weak. So as much as people think, oh, they're important, they're never quite as important. And so if we think of them as core skills, then there is a little more even psychological weight. And I love the root of core is like corazón, the heart, and courage, and the core of the self. And so when you think of the core skills, it's like all those things. So I think that gives it even more power, and it has very big implications for the way we do school.
Absolutely. So one of the things you mentioned earlier is this sort of classic framing of our age, really the end of the old stories from about 1989, the fall of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall and all of that, to about maybe 5 or 10 years ago as VUCA or VUCA, that the world is characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And in some ways that seems quaint now, like obviously the world is characterized by those. And it was you who introduced me to a new framing that doesn't replace VUCA, but certainly goes beyond it to help explain these recent times that we're in now and where we presumably will remain for at least a few more years, which is Banny. Can you tell us a little bit about Banny and what that means?
Yeah. And I'm going to say, so these are frames that are kind of terms that different thinkers have put to describe the times. So they're kind of similar. The Banny, I think, is like maybe intensifies, incomprehensible, nonlinear, anxious, brittle. What I don't love about it, there is a little sense of like incomprehensible feels helpless to me. It doesn't feel as hopeful. And I think we need to, when we characterize the world and the times that we're in, we need to leave a door open to creativity, hope, joy, love as a practice, as a lens. And I think the nonlinear is an interesting
Absolutely.
aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, because you were talking about the old stories, especially the old Western American story of the American dream is a very linear one.
Yes.
But we also know it's a broken line now.
Yeah.
And it's swirling around in a lot of uncertainty. One of the things I wrote down was sometimes I worry about these framings because they have this sense of inevitability about them.
Yeah.
As if they're describing forces out there that are in control. And it raises the question of agency again. Where do we have agency in a Vucka and Banny world? And I've been thinking a lot about that. And in fact, all of the first editions of Walk the Walk are my own series of reflections on what could be antidotes or reframing of this for us as people of Providence here at Providence High School. And for Banny, I said, if the world is brittle, we must stay connected. If the world is anxious, we must build resilience. If the world is nonlinear, we must become agile. And if the world is incomprehensible, we must embrace mystery.
Oh, I love that.
Which prompts, mystery. I think people have a weird relationship with the word mystery.
Yeah.
Right? On the one hand, it could be an Agatha Christie murder mystery kind of thing. You follow the clues and you get the answer. But I think there's a deeper sense of mystery that this moment is calling us maybe to be open to stand in uncertainty, to stand in mystery, but not from fear, but in awe and with curiosity. And I feel really privileged to be at a place like Providence where we can explicitly have conversations about mystery, about standing in awe of the world, even when it can be profoundly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a deeply human stance that maybe we can get back to in these times.
Yeah. It's sort of like really the opposite of AI. AI that's just regurgitating what was done before, as opposed to standing in uncertainty, in not knowing, in being open to something completely new. And we are going to a place collectively that the world has never known. And I think that's where there's like this fork in the road of like, what's the choice that we're going to make?
Yeah. Who do we choose to be?
And who do we choose to be at this time?
Yeah.
Yes. And that is so, everything we do is a choice.
Yes. Well, one of the things that you and I both talk about, and I say it a lot here, and it gets at this notion of memory too, that you talked about even in the pupa stage. There's memory from the caterpillar that is retained in the butterfly.
Yes.
One of the things you and I talk about is being good ancestors. And that's one answer to who do we choose to be. We choose to be good ancestors.
Yes.
Which involves memory, but also involves agency and looking to the future. So when you talk about being good ancestors, what do you mean?
So I love this concept. So one of our big new questions is, what is your legacy or our legacy? So thinking about the long term, the long now.
Yes.
And that's one of the differences between the old story of the instant gratification, instant results, quarterly results. I'm going to base the success, the decision, whatever it is, on immediate, 3-month cycle.
Short-termism.
total short-termism, and this is long-term. And so being a good ancestor, and when I speak about being a good ancestor with different audiences, I find it almost like elevates the atmosphere of the room. Like the parents in the room, like there's this sigh that comes because it's actually inspiring to think about. There's a book, Being a Good Ancestor, Roman Krasnovich, I think. He, talks about these different ways of thinking. So like cathedral thinking is like when people set out to build a cathedral, it might take hundreds of years. Or there's this idea of like colonizing the future, where we are stealing from the future by extracting so much now. And lots of different ideas around short term or long term. And that is such a mindset shift from what we've all grown up with. And so, like we were just talking about, like right now, the Davos World Economic Forum is happening. And there's this fascinating consensus among many of the prominent world leaders, corporate, government, research, who are saying there is a rupture right now between the old world and the new world.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you want to call it order or whatever, but one of those can be, we need new kinds of mindsets and new frames of thinking. So I think it's really exciting right now to be
new time frames of thinking.
New time frames. So if we want to be good ancestors, what are the implications for everything we do now?
Yeah. You mentioned the long now, and for people who are interested in long-termism, I've been fascinated for years about the Long Now Foundation in San Francisco, and they're thinking 1,000-year time frame.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, we study thousands of years of history, but it's so hard for us to imagine in our current environment 1,000 years of future history.
Right.
And we have agency in how that history actually plays out.
Yeah, exactly. I think, this idea that the future isn't something you predict, it's something you create. And that we talk about, like, what are the new skills? I think a new skill, so there's like complex sense making, systems thinking, and futures thinking. I think learning this, there are actual skills. It's not looking into a crystal ball. It's not reading the cards. It's reading the reality. And there is a process of sense making. So futures thinking is an actual, tangible, practical skill. And people who think into the future are looking at a scope of possibilities. And so that also implies confronting really hard possibilities, like where you don't want to go. But the research shows that when you look at the negative potential outcomes, if once you're at that place and something happens, you're more prepared for it. So you become more resilient.
Yeah.
You build trust among those who've kind of gone through that thinking process. So it's kind of brilliant how helpful this kind of thinking can be, that it's community building, it's resilience building. I think it'd be an amazing, like, what should kids learn right now? Learn some futures thinking.
Absolutely.
And like one element, a term I love is emergent optimism. So it's like when you think into the future, including the negative outcomes as well as positive, you can handle it better. And I think every parent I've ever met wants their child to be more resilient. So that's
absolutely
a way to do that. So all of these are part of something I'm going to talk about with the parents and the faculty. Like, what's the new curriculum? What's worth teaching right now? If most of what, like when I think of school, you open a history textbook, it's facts and figures, you memorize dates, you memorize names. Well, all that is just readily available.
It's in our pockets.
It's in our pockets. Yeah. So what do we need to learn and do?
Well, another way of framing this, which could be interesting to explore, I've heard you say multiple times over the last couple of years that Gen Z, like our current students in high school right now, are going to be in the 2030s as they enter adulthood and their professional lives, new civilization builders. Because by the time we get to the mid 2030s and they're graduating from college and graduate school and starting their careers, hopefully we'll be on the other side of this meta-liminal time.
Maybe.
And a new order, a new set of stories will be being written. They'll be in an extraordinary position to have enormous influence over the future, which is one of the sources of hope I have in my life, is knowing that our students are going to have that influence.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by civilization builders?
Yeah. So this is a concept that anthropologists, researchers, different spiritual traditions, they have some concept of this. And I think, it's just like, what are the institutions? What are the processes? What are the norms when so much that we've had has broken? And I don't really know what that's going to look like.
So many possibilities.
It's TBD, right? But one thing I think that's really fascinating as a parent, as an educator, if you were to treat your child or your student as a civilization builder, my stance towards them changes. So that connects again to agency, connects to what do you care about. I think there's a profound respect and mutuality, reciprocity, instead of just let me give you all my wisdom. Let me fill you with all my wisdom.
Because we've left the world in such great shape as adults.
That's
right?
not how it works. Exactly. And I don't think a lot of students respect the adults because we've made such a mess. So if we were to see them as civilization builders and see ourselves as good ancestors, that is a really interesting frame. It's not easy. What does that actually look like? How do we build a school, a strategic plan, norms and policies, curriculum? How do we build those if our starting points, our students are civilization builders, and our school and all of us in it want to be good ancestors?
I love that.
It's a really different starting point.
Absolutely. And I think it's actually a great way to end our conversation. Thank you so much, Homa.
Thank you. And I know I probably left people with more questions, but
hey, that's great.
We're big questions.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Thank you for being my first guest on Walk the Walk. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's so great to be here.
Thanks. Thank you for joining me on Walk the Walk. Please support us by following, subscribing, and visiting us at providencehigh.org/walkthewalk, where you can sign up for our email list to join the conversation. Thanks again, and see you next time.